Hello. Welcome to Matters of DeCorum. I'm Scott Corum. This is what matters to me. Couple of stories. One about a D&D adventure I just read, and then the one I wrote in response. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was with a few friends running the role-playing game department at a local convention here in Southern California. And one of the things we got to do was review tournament adventures that got turned in by staff, just to make sure everything was appropriate and it wasn't that there was a real big problem. We had the opportunity to read some stuff that our friends wrote, and the people who were running games were our friends. One year, an adventure for the Dungeons and Dragons tournament, the tournament that everyone came to the convention for, came to our department to play. Well, that 66% were concerned with. This particular year was entitled Save the Princess. And it was a run-of-the-mill heroes go into where a princess has been abducted by orcs, beat up the orcs, bring the princess back, and return her to her father, the king, for a reward. It was typical. It wasn't particularly progressive, but it was a D&D adventure. It was a D&D adventure based solidly in the literature of fantasy, and okay. But then there was this weird bit at the end. If the players decided not to return the princess for some reason, if they held out for more money or requested a ransom of their own, if they just randomly decided, hey, look, free princess, I guess we get to keep her, there was a section on how the king would respond. Of course, the king would send his champion and some of his elite troops. And there were stats for the champion and the elite troops. They were really simple. It's this from this page of this book, and at this level. And they will deal with the recalcitrant player characters and take the princess back. And I looked at the stat. At that point, it was a footnote. It was if the player characters think that they're going to outsmart the scenario and maybe do something funny with the princess, well, here's how that gets dealt with. You can just hand wave it. Now the king sends a champion and gets the princess back. And I looked at the numbers. And that champion was not getting that princess back. If these player characters have curb stomped an entire dungeon full of orcs, and by this time they probably have, then the king's champion was no threat to them whatsoever. In fact, from a purely metagaming, pragmatic point of view, the player characters were better off going through the adventure, killing all the opposition, getting the princess, asking for a higher price from the king, and then killing the king's champion and the king's elite guards when they showed up to take the princess back, because that would almost double the amount of experience gotten from the adventure. And then you've got a king over there in his castle with no champion and no elite guards. How hard can it be? It's just an upside down dungeon with a lot fewer turns and traps. It invited the player characters to, hey, look, nice kingdom you've got here. It'd be a pity if something were to happen to it. You know. It was a very small amount of out-of-the-box thinking. Now, if the player characters think outside the box that they're going to keep the princess, then this happens. Well, if this happens and the characters are already thinking outside the box, you're just giving them a kingdom. That's awesome loot. So I wrote the tournament for the next year because I wanted something a little bit more deep, something more complex. And I thought it was brilliant. Oh, I worked on this thing. I I wrote an adventure called God of the Black Steel Keep. I created the characters that were handed out as the pre-generated characters to go with it. And there were maps, and there were diagrams and drawings, and a scenario, and all the stats for all the monsters. And it was... okay, it was more than a 4 or 8 hour convention game could really cover in hindsight. 6 groups made it to tournament. 6 groups, 6 players each. A couple of them had 8. And of those 6 groups, one group made it to the actual dungeon portion of the adventure after the intro portion. Didn't finish the dungeon, didn't get that far into it, but they made it into the dungeon. And one group ended with a negative experience point total. The characters ended that adventure with less experience than they had gone into it. Let me tell you about God of the Black Steel Keep. From the player's perspective, all of you have in common a single mentor, a patron, someone who helped bring you up into this world of adventuring and saving the day. She is Alana the Bard, and she has gone missing. Some of her assistants have found you where you have been adventuring across the width and breadth of the land and gathered you together so you could go and see if you can find what has happened to her. She was going to that town over there, Mergensville, and we haven't heard anything. No one's heard anything. No bards have left Mergensville. No merchants have come of it of recent. Something dread is happening there. We beseech you. Go and find what has become of your mentor and our master, Alana. It's a good hook. It's a good hook. It makes everything personal, straight up front. All of these characters, I will probably say this more than once, all of these characters had good somewhere in their alignment. Neutral good, chaotic good, lawful good. There was a spread, but it all ended in good. Fighter, cleric, magic user, rogue, a little bit of everything. Entering the outskirts of Mergensville, you come across a guard tower. It is not occupied. It hasn't been occupied for some time. There is food that has been left. It is old and moldy. There is dust on top of it, as there is on top of everything. There is no equipment to be found in this guard tower. Okay, so you've got a mystery on your hands. People are gone missing. The next portion, there's farmhouses and outbuildings. And in these dozen or so farmhouses and outbuildings, there are families. They have been tied up for some time. They are unconscious, suffering from starvation and dehydration, and are near death, near starved and thirst to death. 2 to 3 to 5 people in one of these houses, depending on which one you go into. Another mystery. Nothing's been really... The houses have been ransacked-ish. Most of the valuables are missing. The food is missing. The people have been left there, tied up, for a while. Exploring into the town itself, there is the town hall in the center of it all. Most of the shops are shuttered. You might find another shopkeep or two tied up and starving in the back of their shop. The town hall has been shuttered. There is debris and detritus from benches and cabinets and chairs stacked up to the landing of the second floor. There is light coming from within, smoke, the sound of revelry and voices. Those of you who speak Orcish will recognize the sounds of worship. In front, in the square in front of the town hall, there is the mayor. He has been impaled on what looks like the claw of a colossal dragon. A removed claw of the colossal dragon. It's been planted in the ground, and the mayor impaled upon it. He's been there for some time. It's a bad situation. It's kind of creepy. It's kind of spooky. It is difficult to sneak into the town hall. The ground floor is just inaccessible. It's just piled high with stuff, and taking stuff down is going to make a lot of noise and take a lot of time, and there will be orcs with bows on that second level balcony firing down at you the entire time you're doing it, and the widows walk around the second floor. But that's not a bad climb. If you can climb up there, you might be able to get there stealthily. There is some penalties, and once up there, you can take out the orcs commando style or engage in a full-on battle on the outside. Work your way into one of the windows, and inside there are a dozen or so orcs and a orcish shaman preparing to sacrifice some weakened and unconscious townsfolk. It is a hard fight for 6 PCs at the level that they were at, not an impossible one. It might have caused some injuries, but I doubt anyone would have died from it. And having defeated these orcs and perhaps helped or at least moved the platform that the villagers were on, there is a trapdoor leading down into a cellar from which the smell of smoke and metal emerges. That's as far as I'm going to go with the player side of the description, because that's as far as anyone got. Seriously, 4 to 8 hours of game time. That is as far you go down that cellar and you start a dungeon. That's, I think the one team that made it all the way to the dungeon made it into the atrium and started to examine stuff, and bing, time ran out. I did not take into account, when I was writing this adventure, how thorough a lot of Dungeons & Dragons players are, particularly tournament players, particularly people who really get into it. So there were a dozen or so houses out there that had a few bits of things and some tied up peasants. One party realized that if you've got people who are starving and dying of thirst tied up, that maybe what you want to do is untie them, see if some water or wine will bring them around, and then carefully feed them to restore them to some semblance of health. That's all it really would take. They needed water, they needed food, and they would be incredibly grateful and might offer up a story or two about what had happened in the town. One group did that, the group that made it furthest in. What did everyone else do? Well, most of the rest of the groups turned it into a house-by-house town clearing. A dozen farmhouses and outbuildings of the town with people in them. They would go in carefully, slowly, methodically, check for traps, make sure there wasn't any treasure in it, see that there were people in there, but the people weren't a threat, maybe tie them up with something else in case that was a trap, because those might have been something, undead-ish, maybe, and if that was the case, then you'd need to make sure that they couldn't break out of those ropes. And we'll come back and check on this later. That's if you're not the last party. What did the last party do? Gleefully went house to house, murdering unconscious, starving, dying of thirst peasants, because, hey, experience. Did I mention that each and every single one of these characters had good someplace in their alignment? And somehow this group of players believed, to the core of their hearts, that they were meant to murder helpless, tied up peasants as a part of the adventure. That's thinking outside the box. Sometimes the box is there for a reason. From the game master side, what has happened in this town? The good folks of what did I call it, Murgisville, were expanding their town hall, sought to give it a slightly larger cellar. In their excavations, they unearthed the entrance to an ancient dwarven keep, a keep known as the Black Steel Keep, which those who read Dwarven could read. Inside this keep were all manner of dire things. There was a room where someone was trying to find out if you starved a ghoul in a ghast, would the ghoul eat the ghast or the ghast eat the ghoul? There was a dwarven forge being fueled by fire. There's a pool of molten metal that a demon was bleeding into at the bottom, which is what gave the black steel its qualities. All of the black steel was cursed. There's a room full of shattered weapons because the dwarves here had tested their weapons to destruction, and amongst the bits of shattered black steel, cursed metal everywhere, there was a chain demon, a chitin that had, or a chain devil, pardon me, a chitin that had shown up, drawn by the sheer amount of cursed metal, and crafted its chains out of the cursed stuff, because it was a devil. It didn't care if it was cursed. There were rune whites, these suits of armor that contained what was left of the spirits of some of these cursed dwarves that were able to animate and move and posed a fairly terrible threat. But at the far end of this, the whole point, past the dwarven leader of the Black Steel Keep, and he was a rune white in his own right that had a enhanced suit of armor and a bigger weapon, and there were a couple of puzzles and traps. But past his chamber was his treasure chamber, occupied by a Draco Lich, the actual god that these dwarves were worshipping. Draco Lich, going by the name of Ikuaran, who fancied itself a true risen undead deity. Go figure. Ilana's soul, before she had been killed by the Draco Lich, was trapped in the phylactery of the thing, a crystal skull at the far end of the treasure chamber. The treasure chamber did include a horn of destruction, which would not only shatter the phylactery, killing Ikuaran, but free the soul of their mentor. And then dragon treasure, loads of it. There's all this cursed steel that you couldn't use anyplace else, but plenty of dragon treasure, lots of experience. It was a huge thing. And the mistake I made was I put a town full of starving villagers on top of it. Am I a little bitter? Maybe. And the main failing was not de-emphasizing the starving villagers, because that might have helped. But I don't know if the game masters, the dungeon masters, handed these adventures, read the adventure beforehand. It was a hefty chunk, granted. I condensed it a bit. A lot of it was situational. You go into this room, read this section. You go into this room, read this section. But there was a very embarrassed dungeon master who, at the end of the adventure, everyone, okay, time is up, and you managed to successfully kill all of the helpless tied-up villagers in every building where you found a helpless tied-up villager. Yeah, woo, high five. What do we get for XP? Minus 5,200. What? Yeah, you got negative XP. These characters have been busted down to zygotes. There's nothing left of them. You lost all the XP in the world, plus some. Because if you show up to a D&D game and your only opposition that you can see is helpless people tied up, not resisting in any way as you coup de grace them one after the other, murdering through house after house of helpless, starving, thirst-driven peasant. And you don't ask yourself, what was I supposed to be doing? Then there's a fundamental flaw in how you're playing Dungeons and Dragons. Just saying. I have God of the Black Steel Keep in a nice manila envelope somewhere on my shelves. I pull it out every so often and weep over it bitterly. My partner Vic and I are actually gearing up to write some Dungeons and Dragons material, submit it through the Dungeon Masters Guild, and that should be fun. And God of the Black Steel Keep might eventually, in some form, make it into that. It's a couple of editions old. I wrote it for 3.5. But nothing that can't be fairly easily transferred to more modern fare. Work our way up to that. I've done terrible things to game masters. I have earned a certain amount of outside the box karma. Some of it deliberately. I don't believe in going into a game, a role-playing game, any role-playing game, with an me versus you mentality. I'm not contesting the players as a game master. I'm not contesting the game master as a player. We're trying to tell a story together. There's opposition. I'm there to beat it or to be driven to character development by my defeats. It happens. That's how you play a game. That's how you tell the story. That's how you engage in this activity that is a role-playing game, particularly with people that you trust and you know how to game with. Every so often, though, the game master starts stacking stuff up because they're the game master and they have an unlimited budget and unlimited resources and they want to show off and smack you in the face with it a little bit. Okay. And then they tell you they're not afraid of your character or what your character represents and to tell you how hopeless your situation is. Now, if that's an NPC telling me my character that as part of a monologue or part of a description of the scenario or the situation you find yourself in, that's rousing. That's a challenge. If that's the game master telling me that, so I don't get any funny ideas about being able to make any headway against their precious scenario, there may be an issue. At that point in time, my entire goal in life is not to beat the scenario and not to beat the dungeon master. My goal at that point in life is at some point to get that GM to set down their book, look me in the eye, and go, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" Okay, it's my goal to do that with every GM at some point when I'm a player. And point to do that with most players as a GM. If it's not over the top enough or outrageous enough, I engage in asymmetrical warfare on both sides of the table. I don't believe in fair fights. And as a player, that's one thing. I don't fight fair as a player. I make characters who are designed not to fight fair. I have a hard time with lawful good characters. Not an impossible time with lawful good characters. I can do Paladin from time to time, but I prefer someone who has a little latitude to backstab if need be. Even tactically or strategically backstab. As a game master, I'm not there to drop hammers on people. Unless it's a game that's specifically about dropping hammers on people, and even then. Trust. Trust is a thing. You have a new group, you're not sure how they're going to react. You play a few games, you play a little safe. That's fine. You see how they react to things, and if they impress you, if you get to trust them. There are a few game masters I trust implicitly. Not because they take it easy on me, but because they don't. Not because they tell stories the way I like, but I like the way they tell stories. There are a number of players I trust implicitly, not because they pony up and are nice, well-behaved little gamers at the table. No. Players I trust implicitly so I can randomly flip to a page in the monster manual, drop a bookmark, and throw that monster, whatever it is, halfway through the scenario, and they're going to deal with it. Not beat it, not kill it necessarily, but deal with it. It's going to stop being a problem. I can make up the most evil, twisted, cynical, devious, infernal, or abyssal, or aberrant, villainous NPC and drop him on the party. Have him planning things in the background and constructing these things, and I don't have to hold back. That's a plan. And they're going to find it or not, and if they find it, they're going to have to do something about it. And if I trust that group, if that's a group I trust, I just let it go. I don't knock them in the face with it. Every so often, stuff's going to go wrong, and then a big thing's going to go wrong at the end, and if they haven't done something to stop it, that's a problem, but not mine. The group in Manhattan Beach. Oh, they will eat a scenario like that alive. They will not only beat up the monster from the middle of the monster manual, and they will not only find the plan laid down by the villain, but by the end of it, they may have recruited that villain as an ally, or induced them to turn over a new leaf, so that the next campaign down, that villain might be giving them aid or assistance, or I might be playing that villain as a character when someone else takes over the campaign. Or they might just smoke the villain without let or hindrance. That has been known to happen, and that is a glorious thing, because villains are meant to be beaten, one way, shape, or form. I have Wednesday night group, the Warriors of Wednesday. The group that the Barrington stories comes from. Those folks will mess a scenario up. I can't. And not even necessarily by conquering or beating it, or going over the top. They will find a way to turn a scenario funny, regardless of how tragic it is. They will jump into a horrible situation with all the odds stacked against them and say, oh, you think this situation's as bad as it can get for us? Hold my beer. Or in the case of Al, hold my bear. And 20 minutes later, everyone is yelling, damn it, Barrington, and no, it's a thing. It might not be 100% beaten, but it's a thing. You got a problem when you write adventures. And that is all of these people, or the people who thought it was a good idea to slaughter a bunch of innocent, helpless people, and the people who can defeat absolutely any scenario when they go into it and put their brains to it, are both going to be reading a written adventure that you put down. They're both going to be playing at that same table. the game master who was very embarrassed to point out they were 5,200 XP down, or the game master who is not afraid to lay out a terrible scenario and fairly confident as people are going to beat it, are all going to get their hands on that book. So you got to include a box. You have to have some form of box. Here is how this scenario can run. By no means should that box be exclusive. If this scenario runs a different way, by all means, go with it. Please break this thing. You know, people talk about being able to break a game. Okay. Do the rules allow me to break this? Yeah. You can break any set of rules. That's kind of one of the limitations of having rules to begin with. They can all be broken. You can push things too far, tweak things the wrong way. You can use logic and reason to make these rules do ridiculous things. Oh my God. You want to make a speedster in Champions Hero System 4th Edition? Sure, you can buy an awful lot of running. Running is good. Ground speed's awesome. Or you can buy flight with a limitation that you have to touch the ground to use it. And now you're really moving because flight's cheaper and makes you move a little bit faster. But wait, how about you buy the teleportation ability with the limitation that you actually traverse the space between the points that you're teleporting between? Now you're moving impossibly fast and you're a very fast speedster. Now do a move by with someone's obvious inaccessible focus, or their accessible indestructible focus, and see if it's actually indestructible. Sorry. Champions geeking. All of which is to say, save the princess, God of the Black Steel Keep, whatever your scenario. As a player, keep your eyes open, ask questions. Because in order to jump outside of the box successfully, it's nice to know what the box is. Just find out the hell the box is first, then jump out of it. As a game master, the box is a suggestion. The box is a dotted line around the objective, and if folks go outside of it, that's not only unavoidable, it is laudable. Learn to roll with it. It takes some improv sometimes, and you will never have better stories to tell than when that group somehow manages to do something completely impossible because they locked onto that one little detail that you almost forgot about and turned the whole thing into a different part of Grimm's fairy tales. Well, thank you for following me on this particular rant. There might have been a little bitterness in there, but there's a lot of victory in it too. Experience works for more than just PCs. Gamers get experience too. And an experienced gamer is a dangerous thinker sometimes. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you didn't enjoy the video, go ahead and give me a thumbs down. Feedback is feedback. If you would like to share some of your experiences with your Dungeons & Dragons adventures or adventures you've had in other systems, or hear me talk about something else or have a suggestion for a topic for a video, leave me a comment. You'll love leaving me a comment. I'll love getting a comment. Questions, suggestions, anything. If you really dug the video, I'd like you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. If you do subscribe, go ahead and hit that little notification bell next to the subscribe button so you get notified as soon as these videos come out and you can see them more regularly. If you super dug the video, I invite you to hit me up at my Patreon page, www.patreon.com/ScottCorum, and consider donating. Absolutely anything helps and allows me to make better videos more often. In the meantime, thank you for watching. I'm Scott Corum. This is what has mattered to me, and I will see you next time on the next Matters of DeCorum.